In this episode, we reveal how abusers manipulate even after separation.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
This week, we had Hope J. and Lynn Catalano on the show, and we had a conversation about navigating a divorce and time sharing with a narcissist, protecting your children throughout the process, and where to seek help from. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Hope J. and Lynn Catalano are joining us. Lynn is a licensed attorney in New York State, but is now leading a nonprofit as a professional fundraiser for the last 20 years. And today she has pivoted to speak to groups of all sizes to share experiences and help people rise above the chaos. Hope has devoted her career to advocacy for women and children. She is not only an attorney, but spent the first 10 years of her career as a social worker. She currently practices as a family law attorney at her firm, the Law Office of Hope RJ, PLLC. And together, Hope and Lynn serve as president and vice president of the Center for Hope, WNY, West New York, and host a podcast entitled The Narcissist Slayers. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, it's very exciting to have you both. We have so much to talk about. I want to start asking if you'll each share a little bit about yourself and really, how you got into family law and then the narcissist slayers. Like really, I know great reasons that we're going to want to know about. So whoever wants to go first.
I can go first, Heather. So I am a practicing attorney here in Buffalo, New York. I am a former prosecutor, and I've spent my entire career advocating for women and children. I got into family law when I went out on my own, opened up a practice, and became really involved in representing and advocating women who are leaving abusive relationships in my solo practice. But as time went on, I became more aware of the challenges that women are facing leaving these kinds of relationships that involve narcissists and narcissistic abuse. In my former life as a prosecutor, I was in the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Bureau. So I know firsthand what it means to prosecute men who have committed domestic violence crimes. It's much easier when, it's terrible situation for women who are involved in these relationships, but it's much easier to get convictions and to really, for people to understand and to be aware of these issues when someone has bruises and broken bones. The challenge here and the challenge that I have found, and the reason why I founded the Center for Hope of Western New York, is to bring awareness to emotional and psychological abuse and coercive control and how it impacts women and children in the family court system.
And there is, yes, so much work that needs to be done in educating, particularly the court personnel and attorneys to understand that. Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done there. There is no doubt. And Lynn, for our listeners, please share a little bit about yourself as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Heather, for having us today. While I have a law degree and I have passed the bar, I've never practiced law. And I did spend 20 years leading not-for-profits as a professional fundraiser. However, I have pivoted now, and I am a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. And, I often tell people, not one child says when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up is a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. Why would they, right? But when you are put in that position, when you have survived narcissistic abuse, as I did, and then I dove deep into the research, whether that was my coping mechanism or that was my legal background, who knows, but I ended up writing a book after I had interviewed many, many people who had suffered narcissistic abuse in different ways than I had. And that's wrecking ball relationships, how to identify, live with, or leave the narcissist in your life. I don't believe in coincidences, Heather. And here I am in Western New York. And somehow Hope J found me. And we have been working together both on the not-for-profit, the Center for Hope, and helping people who are victims of narcissistic abuse in many ways, which I'm sure we'll share with you today, as well as on the Narcissist Slayers podcast. And so we are really, I don't know if you saw our graphic, but we consider ourselves superheroes in helping people who have been victims of this type of abuse. So thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you both for being here. And yes, I know this year I've had the opportunity to have several guests on our show with special training experience in narcissism and trauma relationships and the covert narcissism, so many things. So I have learned so much in addition to kind of just what I learned along the way as an attorney and involved in those kind of relationships. But I think one of the biggest things I have learned is that for women to hear you explain what it is, and then they know they're not crazy. And they're like, okay, this is really going on. And that's, I think, really huge, because a lot of times that's what their abuser's trying to do, make them think they're going crazy. And they're wondering, am I imagining this? Is it real? Like, or is it really that bad, but it feels that bad? And they just aren't sure. And so I know what you're doing is great, because so many of the women need to know that, hey, that is not okay, not normal, and this is going on.
Absolutely. And people who find us, Heather, either through the Center for Hope of Western New York or through our podcast, The Narcissist Slayers, they are in all different stages of awareness, education, recovery, that people really start to reflect on the relationship that they've been in and to kind of recognize that it actually is abuse, is when they do talk to me in a legal consultation, or they talk to Lynn when she does a consultation for narcissistic abuse recovery coach. So sometimes they really just need to have somebody validate their experiences and then give them the language, right? Give them the awareness of that what they're going through is abuse. Because I think, again, as I said earlier, when you don't have marks, when you don't have bruises, when nobody's ever actually laid a hand on you, but you feel like you're drowning and you don't understand why the relationship that you're in is so incredibly difficult, you're not necessarily thinking that it's abuse until I think somebody like you or us brings them to a place where they can hear that reflected back to them, that these kinds of tactics that these abusers are using are intentional, right? They're intentional and they're meant for the crazy making. They're meant to gaslight you. They're meant to make you feel less than. They're meant to make you question yourself and your judgment and everything else. Awareness and education is something that we offer at the Center for Hope of Western New York, and that's what we're doing, Lynn and I are doing in our podcast as well.
Heather, part of this type of abuse that people don't get, I know I didn't get it when I was in the middle of it, and I certainly didn't know the terminology. None of us do, but it's isolation. It's that guilt and shame and embarrassment that's all rolled up with the hurt and the cruelty, and you don't really have someone, perhaps you had people to talk to, but you've been isolated from them by the narcissist. And so you feel like you are all alone. This is the one form of emotional abuse where other people's stories really provide comfort. Like you all of a sudden becoming aware that you're not the only one who has suffered this is incredibly empowering.
And then for our listeners, right, you're not alone. And you can survive this, but you're going to have to go through it. And you didn't know it getting into this relationship, right? Narcissists are very good at, love bombing their way in and you're the best. And then all of a sudden, so it's going to be, a challenge to get out of, but worth it at the end of the day. which let's talk about that leaving, because I think that's really, important. And I believe that certainly for our clients and listeners, like, you may not want to hear this, but we got to tell you, right? Like, it's what's going to happen, but then you won't get blindsided, because when you leave, you're thinking, I'm free. However, if we've got a divorce to contend with or children, the abuse doesn't necessarily stop and often ramps up instead. So I'd love for you guys to speak on that a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah, so I think, as you know, Heather, when somebody is thinking about leaving a narcissist, it's a very complicated situation that you find yourself in, because you've been threatened, you've been made to be fearful, but you think that you're going to lose everything because you've been threatened that if you leave the person, that they're going to take everything from you. They're going to take the kids, they're going to take all your assets. Most women, and again, I'm using the pronoun he, she, and women typically because we do work predominantly with women, but that doesn't mean that there aren't men who are also suffering from narcissistic abuse, who may be feeling these same kinds of things when they're anticipating leaving a narcissist. But it's not, I don't think that somebody wakes up one day and says, like, I'm going to leave. It's a long process. I always tell people when they come in for a consultation and they're thinking about starting a divorce action, that you really have to get all your ducks in a row, because once a narcissist loses control over you, then they want to control how other people see you. And I think that's what you're talking about when you say what happens afterwards, that we call the post-separation legal abuse, right? Once you've decided and you've actually stood up to the narcissist and they can no longer control you, everything's up for grabs at that point. A narcissist will do everything in their power. This is not somebody, I always tell my clients, you're not playing on the same board. If you think that you're coming into this situation where you're going to be able to negotiate fairly with somebody, a lot of times my clients think maybe we can go to mediation. I absolutely never recommend mediation with a divorce from a narcissist because of the power and control issues, right? Because they're not trying to find a middle ground. They want to destroy you, right? It's full on nuclear implosion most of the time when you are attempting to leave a narcissist. So people are scared. Women are scared because they don't want to lose custody of their children. They believe the narcissist when they say, I'm going to take everything you have. No one, if I can't have you, no one will. There's so many threats that are made that this isn't, somebody, when they're thinking about this, they really need a whole, that's essentially really why I started the Center for Hope, because you really need a whole team of people around you to support you through this, because there's going to be many, many times that you're going to say to yourself, why did I do this? Or feel like you're not capable of continuing, because as you said, they're going to amp it up. They are going to amp it up through their attorneys. They're going to amp it up through threats. A lot of them are very, very smart, and they're not going to do anything that's going to rise to the level of criminal intervention or getting arrested, but they're going to make your life a living hell. So there's a lot of things that you can and should do when you're getting ready to divorce a narcissist. I mean, Lynn and I, we've probably done whole podcasts on these things, but, really get yourself an attorney who understands the dynamics of domestic violence. That's the first thing that I advise anybody to do. Because if your lawyer doesn't understand, if they just think, oh, he's not a nice guy, he's a real jerk. I've heard a lot of women who come to me after they've been with other lawyers, they'll say, my lawyer just didn't understand who he was, or, what we were dealing with on the other side. So it's not just that he's a jerk. He's an abuser. Right. He's a manipulator. He's going to do everything in his power to convince the courts, to convince the judge, to convince the attorney who represents the kids that you're the problem and that he's the victim. So there's a lot that we need to do. And I always say, get out in front. I want to control the narrative, okay? I don't want to play defense. It's harder when you're playing defense. Harder. You have to really help women to feel strong enough to pull the trigger, because they are very frightened of the repercussions and the consequences of doing that.
Absolutely. And, some of the things for our listeners, obviously the attorney with the experience and who understands domestic violence, and who can help you really, who understands your situation. And it's not just pushing it off like that doesn't matter. And we'll get to that, hopefully within the podcast, like, what because that can be a challenge in and of itself, right? How much of this, at least in Florida, comes before the judge. I think that's going to depend if there are children or not, and the extent of the abuse and or manipulation as far as, what you need later, care and counseling. But, I'd love to get your take on the clients in their first steps as far as getting into counseling, again, with somebody who really understands. Because if they don't understand that trauma and potential, most likely PTSD that you really are going through, that might, I don't want to say it won't help, but I find in a lot of ways it might not to the extent that you really need, at this point, if you are finally strong enough to be like, I'm going to leave. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm going to let Lynn take that one. I just want to say one thing to that is you're right. Not only can a counselor not help, but the wrong counselor can hurt because they're giving advice that is contraindicated when you're dealing with a narcissist.
I agree completely. And Hope knows my situation. I went to therapy when I was at my worst with my narcissist. And this is by no means any disrespect to therapy. I have a BA in psychology. I firmly believe in therapy. I just want you to know you need to find the right therapist. And so in many cases, as in mine, the therapist was well-versed in a little bit of every area of mental illness, but not necessarily narcissistic personality disorder. And I could read the DSM. I read it. I saw I did something that I now caution my clients is a red flag. I Googled my narcissist symptoms. Okay. But when you're at your wit's end, you're like, look, I know something's wrong. I know this isn't normal. What is this? Like, I don't know what this is. And so I'm Googling it and it's coming up narcissistic personality disorder, which causes you to do a deeper dive into that. And so, yes, I read the DSM-5, I read the specifications, and guess what? He met all of them. I mean, I don't mean to brag, but my narcissist was 10 out of 10, so not everybody's is. But what that means is that you have to do a little more work, and it is a little more challenging to find a therapist that is well-versed in this area. Now, I'm going to brag a little bit about the Center for Hope here, because these are the principles that Hope founded it on. And they were 4 pillars. And the 1 is legal, obviously. 2 is financial. And as a result, we have a wonderful financial coach who can help you prepare if you are getting ready to leave your narcissist.
She's a certified divorce financial analyst, actually. She's really somebody that if you've been suffer financial abuse, she's somebody that can help you get your arms around it, for sure.
And we all know that's a huge part of this, right?
Yeah.
And that makes it very difficult to leave, is what you're talking about. Yes. Then the other 2 pillars of our Center for Hope are mental health. And so as a result of that, we have wonderful, highly qualified therapists on staff who can help you specifically. And they know so much about narcissistic personality disorder. I wish I had known when I was going through that. And then our 4th pillar is holistic health, because we believe in the whole person. And so, we try and find providers that can help in those areas. But Center for Hope is young. We're just 3 years old. Like, we are a very young not-for-profit, and we are constantly evolving and changing to meet the victim's needs and wants. And, it's funny because the podcast has given us really a national platform, and we've gotten so much more attraction, so much more recognition of the center in that way. And we're able to help so many more people. Hope, I would love for you to talk about the support groups. Since
so Heather, I just kind of wanted to pivot back a little bit, though, about like her question about mental health and how it sort of dovetails with when you are getting ready to leave your narcissist. So, I often have women come into my office for a legal consultation. And that, because I've been doing this for a long time and I understand just sort of intuitively where people are, and I know how difficult it's going to be when you do pull the trigger, that I can tell when somebody is too emotionally fragile, that they haven't really, they haven't battened up, or what's that phrase? Like they haven't built themselves up enough to be able to withstand the storm, right? And I don't want my clients to, commence a divorce action and then get pulled right back in by the Hoovers and the threats and all of that, because they haven't built themselves up enough to be able to withstand it. So sometimes I say to my clients, you might think you are, but you're not. So I'm going to send you to a really great mental health counselor. I'm going to send you to, and I want you to go through our narcissistic abuse education and recovery workshop series, which is what Lynn was referring to. But we have a fantastic program that gives both education and clinical awareness and assistance and support. So, people who go through this program, when they get to the other side, they've learned so much about themselves. They've learned so much about narcissistic abuse. They've learned, not only have they learned what it is, they've learned how it's impacted them, and they've learned tools to cope, right? Because that's a lot of times what's missing is, even if you're like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening, how do I help myself? How do I get out of this? How do I get through this? How do I help my kids? Right? Because when you get into a contested custody battle with a narcissist, and kids are going to be used as pawns, and it's heartbreaking. How am I going to deal with these things? So people have to be strong enough, because what I don't want to see happen is for somebody to start an action and then fold, right? Because they've been manipulated by the narcissist, because they haven't learned how to set good boundaries yet. They haven't learned how to go no contact yet. They haven't learned the things that you have to be able to do for yourself.
Right, which is wonderful that you have all of those resources. And it is important, I think, for women. And very often I agree, they come to our office for a consultation, and it's like, yeah, we can begin moving forward, but you also need on your team that mental health professional, because you're really going to need that as well. Now, what's interesting that I really want to touch on is that you have in New York, the AFC, an attorney for children. And at least from listening to some of the podcasts, it sounds like that's pretty common, but I'd love for you to touch on it, like how common that becomes involved. And is this a good thing, a bad thing, or it depends where you are in a divorce, divorcing your narcissist husband?
So can I ask a question just so that I understand like the difference? So in Florida, if somebody was to file a contested divorce action or a contested custody action, there wouldn't necessarily be an attorney assigned to represent kids?
That is correct. And in fact, it's very rare in a divorce situation. And we do have, you could seek to have a guardian ad litem appointed, but that's not an attorney, right? So that's just kind of, there's the communicator, but then you could ask for an attorney ad litem. But that's rare, and frankly, the judges are going to need compelling information to grant that. And then, of course, that'll be a cost to both the parties. So it's often something that is discussed and debated. Like, do you think this would be wise? We're not sure if we will prevail, but is absolutely not a standard, a basic thing.
That's very interesting. Especially to me, because I actually am an AFC, so I do attorney for children work as well as represent litigants. So yeah, I mean, just briefly, in New York, anytime a contested custody case is filed in a family court, there is going to be an attorney assigned by the court to represent the children. Yes, every contested custody case. And the vast majority of them are state paid. We have the Attorney for Children program, which, any attorney, if they go through the training, and there's a lot of training that you have to go through to be appointed an AFC and to be part of that program. But once you complete the training, then you can get those assignments through the court. And so our job as AFCs is to represent children and what children want in these cases
Yeah.
because, when you talk about what children want, it's not the same thing as what's in the children's best interests a lot of the time, right? So
Exactly.
it's very interesting, because we cannot substitute judgment. There's only very, very small percentage of cases if that, and there has to be an imminent risk of harm or the child is simply unable for reasons of maybe mental illness or cognitive decline or age. Obviously, an infant can't express their wishes. But other than that, we have to go into court and advocate for our child clients the same way that you and I advocate for our adult clients. So it's what they want, which makes it really difficult in these types of cases because, as you know, there's so much coercive control that's going on in a relationship like this. Not only is the abuser controlling his partner, his wife or girlfriend or whatever, but they also have their claws into the children as well. Children are oftentimes afraid. They're afraid to speak out against the abusive parent because they know the repercussions of that, because they're going to get the same, as a child of a narcissist, Lynn can tell you, they're going to get the same silent treatment. They're going to get the same rage storms. They're going to get the same criticisms. And they've learned this. They've learned that they need to stay quiet or they need to protect that parent. So then the mother, it's often sometimes the father, most of the times the mother, who I term like the protective parent. Tina Swithin is the person who is out there doing this really difficult work in One Mom's Battle. But I see it all the time as a attorney representing, litigants, is that if the AFC doesn't understand the dynamics and can't see what's happening in the context of a divorce that is characterized by coercive control, then the AFC is coming in and saying this child client loves his mom and dad. It's in this child's best interest to have a relationship with both parents. And even if the child client is afraid of the father for whatever reasons, but not willing or able to articulate that, if I come forward and try and list all the reasons, then my client oftentimes is being accused of alienating the children against the father. So it's a very complicated web. It's a very difficult scenario in family court. And AFCs, can they help or hinder the case? It really depends. Sometimes AFCs don't get it. It doesn't matter how much we try to educate them. They love the he said, she said thing. They're not seeing that one person is the perpetrator and the other person is the victim. It's a very difficult dynamic to explain to people if they don't understand the fundamentals of narcissistic abuse.
Yeah, so it just sounds like in these particular cases, if the AFC doesn't understand the pathology and the presence of the narcissist, it could be actually worse for the child, certainly for the mother. I mean, I represent women, so that's why I am always talking about it from the women's and mom's point of view. But, I can see very easily how the narcissist can totally manipulate the system as well as the children and could end up, pretty detrimental results by having an AFC.
It can cut both ways, Heather. It really can. If you get a good AFC who understands the dynamics and can see through it. I've had cases where, the AFC's been fantastic. And if we stand together, and, obviously, like I said, the AFC represents the child. But oftentimes these children are unwilling or unable to speak up. But in the cases where they are, and they're willing to speak up, we need a strong AFC that's going to advocate zealously for their position. So when we get the feedback or the blowback from, inevitably the father's attorney is going to scream alienation. It's just what they do.
Oh, right.
I mean, I have a couple of cases like this right now, and I'm pulling my hair out, just because it makes me want to scream this debunked alienation nonsense. But unfortunately, New York allows testimony about alienation, not parental alienation syndrome. It won't, but it does allow testimony if you're going to try and put forth testimony and evidence that a child's been alienated. So they don't understand this dynamic of the protective parent. Really, it's not alienation. It's simply a mother trying to protect her children from the abusive parent. Yeah. And
so I would love to know also in New York, what Is there a general, like a default on timeshare, which we call custody time sharing? Is it like essentially presumed it's going to be 50-50 and then you got to back your way out of that if you're thinking it should be less?
That's exactly it, Heather. Is that what's going on in Florida too?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't always this way, right? Years
No.
ago, it wasn't always this way. So we've moved toward the middle. And it's interesting that it's happening in other states too. So yes, I mean, and that's the hard conversation that I have to have with my clients when they come into my office and they think, well, I'm going to get primary custody because of this, this, and this. And I have to give them the, because I'm very direct. I'm a very honest person and attorney. I don't want to blow smoke and I don't want to give people a reason to think that I can do something that I know I can't do. Now, am I going to advocate zealously for you? Absolutely, I am. But I also want people to have realistic expectations. As you know, Heather, we're not magicians, we're lawyers, right? So we can only do what we can do. And when it's a presumption, a 50-50 presumption, absent severe substance abuse, severe mental illness, domestic violence that I can prove with a paper trail and domestic incident reports and all that kind of stuff, it's difficult to move the needle away from that 50-50. And I think that deters a lot of people because they don't want to and I get it. Believe me, I'm divorced. If somebody told me that I wasn't going to see my children 50% of the time, that might deter me too. So.
Yes. And it recently changed in Florida in 2023 to where now statutorily it's the presumption. And for a lot of cases, that represents the makeup of many families, but it's the ones like this and with what we're talking about, the narcissistic abuse and, that coercive control. And, I think where many of our listeners, they're like, okay, I've got to at least, if I'm in the marriage and I'm here, I'm at least protecting my kids and I'm trying to I am the buffer. And until they can't do it anymore. And I think that's when, they are looking for a way out and they recognize that it's going to be a problem and their children will definitely
Heather,
have time with their dad.
When people give me I've heard that, I'm sure, as you have many, many times. And I always think of that analogy of like putting your oxygen mask on first, right? You have to be able to function. And what's happening to you in the context of that relationship is you are losing all sense of yourself, right? You're losing your identity. You're losing your self-esteem. It's like we start out these full, substantial people, and at the end of these relationships, we're shadows of the people that we used to be. I tell people all the time, kids only need one sane parent, right? They only need one. If you can get out of this and be able to create a space for your children that is, peace, right? That when they're here in this house with you, that it's peaceful and it's sane. And can you control what's happening in his house? No, you can't do that. But you can control what's happening in yours. And the danger, Heather, is if you stay, the longer you stay, the more you're modeling to your children that they're watching the way he's treating you. And they're thinking, and if you have boys and girls, they're learning a lot. They're learning what's okay to accept in a relationship, that this kind of abuse is acceptable. Boys are learning that this kind of abuse is normal and that they could potentially become perpetrators. They start treating their mothers, the longer boys are watching this and are in this kind of thing, they start to turn on their moms. And they start to show that same kind of aggression. The older they are, the harder it is. So I tell people it's better to get out. It's always better to get out.
And I agree with you completely because, yes, we're talking from my perspective, it's the husband, the father, but yet you can teach your children to cope if you can get out and model healthy behaviors and the way to deal with it. And I'd love to hear from you, Lynn, from the coaching part, right? How do you help women get the confidence or just feel like they can do it?
I do believe that the first part is always validation because we're all looking for that of what we experienced, right? That it wasn't normal and that we were right to recognize that and get out. I do want to emphasize I never coach anyone to end their relationship or to make what choice they should make. That's not up to me. I try and provide as much education and information for you to let you know what you're dealing with and who this person is. And then I help them to find strategies, whether that's to stay or to leave. I want them to make an informed decision about that. And so I've coached people at every juncture of their relationship, whether it's just discovering who this person is or it's questioning what's happening, questioning their own reality, which we all do in this type of relationship. And then it's, what should I do next? And so it's very interesting because Hope and I often find ourselves referring clients to each other, whether that's someone coming to Hope in the beginning stages and that they need the help to process the trauma that they have experienced, or for me, it's someone who's come to the realization, okay, I think I need to hire legal counsel at this point. So it is all about information and education, but it's also about looking at all of that through the filter of your own experience. And so everything I do is customized to each person. Like I have a framework, but everything is bespoke, I mean, it has to be. But at the end of my coaching program, it's all about empowerment.
Right. Which is wonderful. I appreciate that so much, right? Just helping them do what it is they want to do and just giving them the tools to do that. So let's talk to our listeners. How do we help women who are listening thinking, okay, we'll just say I'm going through the divorce, but how do I protect my children? I feel like they're at risk, and how do I protect them?
Cool.
Yeah, so these are the women who are in the middle of the storm. Yeah, okay. All right, so there's a lot of things that I advise my clients to do that I think ultimately will help them to protect their children, whether it's during, the middle or sort of it as an end goal, because, it's all about strategy too, right? So you want to be thinking ahead. It's super important, particularly if you're in the middle of a contested custody battle and you think that there might be a trial, right? So you want to make sure that your children are in counseling. We work with counselors all the time, and I know who the good ones are, the ones that I trust, the ones that I know really get this dynamic, the ones who can help these children through this kind of trauma, right? Because there's a lot of trauma associated with living in a household like this, whether or not there is because in some of these cases, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Heather, too, there is physical domestic violence. Not only is there emotional abuse, but there's physical abuse and sometimes sexual abuse, right? So we need our kids in counseling. And I don't know about Florida courts, but in New York, there's not a family court judge that I can think of that wouldn't support that. And if your narcissistic partner is saying, no, they don't need counseling, and I hear that a lot, they're going to be overruled. They're going to be overruled by the AFC. They're going to be overruled by the judge, and they will be ordered to go to counseling, particularly if they're having issues like in school or they're having anxiety. A lot of times you're going to see that they have sleeping problems, they have stomach aches. Sometimes there's self-injurious behavior. So if your children are exhibiting any of these things, you get them in counseling, and not just a school counselor. Although I love school counselors. I'm not saying school counselors are fine if that's, what you're, but I think somebody, like we said earlier, but this is for kids, right? Someone who understands, who works with children, if they're adolescents, who works with adolescents, because we all know how challenging adolescents can be, right? So we want people who have that skill set and also understand the dynamics of abuse, okay? That's to help your kids, and also if you need, at some point you might need them to testify in a trial. So another thing that you can do is, and I don't know whether or not, again, this is something that is done in Florida, but here we do things called custodial evaluations. And that's when we have experts kind of weigh in on who ultimately they believe is the more fit custodial parent. And again, these are a crapshoot because sometimes the narcissists are so skilled that they can fool everyone. including PhD psychologists who are not seeing through them. So, a lot of times when my clients are like, I want a custodial evaluation, I know they're going to be able to see they have MPD and they're going to get it and they're going to get it. And I'm like, I've seen cases where you've paid thousands and thousands of dollars and it's coming back not the way you want it to. So, it's an option. It's something that we do. And I want to think ultimately that it will protect your children because then you have an expert that you can have testify in that trial. But again, I think it's a judicious sort of an assessment and decision that should be made by your legal counsel, depending on whether or not that's necessary. The parenting agreements and the orders that are either the temporary ones that you have as you're going through the proceeding, through the litigation, your attorney should be able to get you things that are going to make it less difficult for you, less hostile, less that you have to interact with this person, the better. I am huge on parenting apps. I don't know if you guys use them in Florida, but if you ever heard of Our Family Wizard and App Close, I am a huge proponent of parenting apps. First of all, it's a live transcript of everything that it's much easier for lawyers when we need to go back into court. We can just pull the transcript. But I think it's a fishbowl, right? Now all of your communications are here. Our Family Wizard has a lot of great bells and whistles if you can pay for the plan that shows when somebody's saying something stupid and there's like a red light or something. But I don't know that many people that use that, but I know that it has a lot of options. Parenting apps are fantastic. Have your lawyer ensure that any orders state that all communication is to be through a parenting app. And regarding the health, welfare, and education of the children only, you don't want there to be any gray area where he's going to ask who you're dating or debase you for something. It needs to be tight. What I suggest to people is you need to learn how to do gray rock. Gray rock is something that Lynn and I talk about. We have a whole podcast on gray rock if anybody wants to listen to it. Gray rock is essential. It's essential for you to keep your sanity, and it also helps you to be a better parent to your children because you're not falling down the rabbit hole every time they say something to trigger you. Most importantly, take care of yourself. Like I said, you're going to put your own oxygen mask on before you can help your kids. You need to be in counseling. You need to be taking care of you. Find your support system. Find somebody like Lynn Catalano who can coach people all over the country, by the way, not just in New York. Come to the Center for Hope and sign up for our support group. We can also work with people all over the country. So these are things that, you need to get your emotional health in a place where you can be a sane, supportive parent to your kids.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I can't believe our time has gone as fast as it is because there's so much more we can talk about and should talk about. But,
well, Heather, we want to have you on our podcast, so maybe we can continue the conversation.
Okay. Well, then we can. I would love to do that for sure. And, but before we go, Hope and Lynn, I'd love for each of you to, impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience.
Wow. Well, first of all, I want your listeners to know you are not alone. Whatever you're feeling right now, please know that you are definitely not alone. This is not your fault. You did not do anything to deserve this kind of behavior. There's so many resources out there for you. Please, if you're listening, check out our podcast, check out our websites. We have so much to offer. I have lots of free resources on my website, lynncatalano.com. So please go there, learn about what you're dealing with. We used to have a department store in Western New York a long time ago. Hope will know what I'm talking about. But their motto was an educated consumer is our best customer. And I believe that stands true for anyone that's been a victim of this type of abuse. The more you know, the better prepared you're going to be to face those challenges that high conflict people bring and to heal yourself. And so do take care of yourself. Give yourself some grace during this time.
Thank you so much. And Hope?
Yeah, so I am always amazed by my clients. I don't know how to really put words to it because when people first start this journey and they're broken and just, like I said, a shell of their former selves, a shadow of their former selves, And when I watch people go through this and go through the programs that we offer and go through that support group, that recovery group, and go through counseling and learn all the techniques to manage narcissistic abuse and learn that the narcissist no longer has power and control over them, and they take back their lives little by little, piece by piece. And I see someone, I had a client who my first conversation with her was when she was in a psychiatric hospital after she had tried to commit suicide. Mm-hmm. And at the end of her journey, she has, she's a completely different person. She has sole custody of her children now. She is a warrior, helping other women. She was the speaker at our Purple Party. We have an annual fundraising event every year for the Center for Hope. It's called the Purple Party. You can find information about it on our website. She got up and spoke in front of a large group of people about her experiences and where she came from and how their resilience, Heather. Mm-hmm. What it tells me is that you can do anything. You can come back from anything. And with the right support from the doctors to the lawyers to everyone who helped her along the way. But this applies to anyone, right? Don't give up on yourself, all right? Because just because you have been taken advantage of and decimated by an abuser, they don't own you and they don't own your life moving forward. This was just a little fraction of your life. You're going to take it back and you're going to have a whole, long, productive, happy life afterwards. Lynn and I are living proof of that, by the way, and all the people who have come through the Center for Hope.
Well, thank you both so much. I know that, Lynn, you gave us your website, lynncatalano.com. But Hope, what about the Center for Hope? And then, of course, your law office. Where can our people, find you?
If you want to get in touch with Lynn and I, we would love to hear from you. We actually are going to start a Patreon where we're going to be answering questions that people write into us. So if you have any questions specifically for Lynn or I, you can reach us at narcslayers@centerforhopewny.org. You can find Center for Hope. We're all over social media, the Center for Hope of Western New York on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Also, the Narcissist Slayers podcast on Facebook and LinkedIn. We're at Narc Slayers Pod on Instagram and X. Yeah.
YouTube.
Okay. Yes. We have a YouTube channel as well. Yes. The Narcissist Slayers podcast on YouTube.
Well, wonderful. We've reached the end of our show today. Thank you so much, Hope J. and Lynn Catalano, for joining us to discuss navigating a divorce and time sharing with a narcissist and protecting your children throughout the process, and of course, where to seek help from. Really appreciate you both today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Listeners, if you or someone you know is going through a divorce or is thinking about a divorce in the Northeast Florida area, please reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. You'll find our practice areas and the link to our website in the show notes, as well as Hope and Lynn's links. Thank you all for listening.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.